Good evening and welcome to this edition of the RGA Weekly Webinars. Sorry to have dragged you in from this beautiful sunshine, but just while we wait for everyone to join, I'll remind you that if you'd like to ask any questions during the webinar, you can do this by using the Q&A bubble, usually at the bottom of your screen, or the chat function. Please let me know which group you're with, and I won't interrupt their presentation, but I will make sure we have time to go through all of them at the end. So I'm Lindsay Wager, the Training and Education Manager. And my guest speaker tonight is Valerie Cooper. She's a regional physio for Grampian and Highland. Valerie's been qualified in hippotherapy since 2010 and has been a green coach for 5 years. She began training with Strathbogie for the last 4 years with art hippotherapy. Valerie became regional and county physio after qualifying in hippotherapy in 2010, and she began volunteering with Aberdeen RDA Group in 2008 when her son was volunteering as part of his Duke of Edinburgh Award. Valerie is going to take us through the all-important participant assessment form this evening to remind groups of the importance of communication with new and existing participants coming back to RDA activities after such a long time off. Welcome, Valerie. Thank you for joining us. So I'll attempt to share my screen just now and get the presentation started for you. Let's get the right screen. And away we go. Can you see that, Valerie?
Yes, I can. Thank you, Lindsay.
Thank you.
So as Lindsay said, I'm Valerie Cooper and I'm a regional physiotherapist, and I also practice hippotherapy. What I'm going to do tonight is just really talk you through how best to get started again, and the things that you might be worried about starting back. And obviously, after such a long time not seeing your participants and your riders, and some of the worries that might be going through your head about this. So we'll go to the first slide. Obviously, we're all delighted to have our participants coming back to us, and if you're like myself, I can't wait to get started again. I've really missed seeing everybody, and I'm really looking forward to seeing everybody again. But I know that in the space of the time that we've all been off, I know that my own body shape has changed significantly, and a lot of us have been eating a lot and not doing very much exercise over that time. So if we imagine that, you know, that's happened to ourselves, we can imagine that our riders with their problems and issues might have had more challenges to face over this long period of time. I think it's really important that we touch base with our riders before they come back. And various ways to do that are to try and maybe have a welcome day where you find out how they've been and just invite them to come for a visit. Even picking up the phone, sending an email, finding out how they've been over lockdown, whether anything has changed in their circumstances. I know myself, a few of my riders have had operations, so you never know what's happened over that period of time. They might have been poorly, or they might just have been very much shielding and not been able to go out and even, you know, get what little exercise we have been allowed to take. So it's really important that you put some feelers out there and find out what has been going on with your riders. You can use, as I said, the idea of a welcome back session, and before they even get on a horse again, and really just say to them, we're going to have a session for you to come back and just see us, meet the horses again, be in that environment again. For some kids or adults, this might be actually quite scary in itself, just coming back into that environment, just seeing the horses again. If you think about how some of your riders were when they first started riding, maybe some of them did take a while before they settled into accepting being around the horses. And so having that time off could really be quite stressful for some of them, with the thought of coming back into that equestrian environment again. So having a welcome day, or even doing some quiet corners with their carer or parent, would be a really good way, not only of just getting them used to the environment again, but also for you to observe them and see how they've changed, and see, you know, if there's anything that's really noticeably different about their demeanor, about their physical capabilities, about their behavior, about how they're communicating, and just about how they've been over this period of time. It's a good opportunity to chat through what's been going on with them, if you invite them back in this non-threatening way. So there's absolutely loads to consider. As I've said, there's already the fact that they may not have been exercising at all. So obviously their ability to be fit and tolerate half an hour or 20 minutes on a horse is going to have diminished. Muscle weakness as well as fitness, general fitness. There may be muscles that they're using a lot while they're on the horse, that because they haven't been riding, particularly core muscles and postural muscles, may be significantly weaker, and they might find the wobbliness of being on a horse much more challenging than they did the last time you saw them on the horse. So don't expect your participants to be able to look the same when they get on the horse again. They may have had, as I said, they may have been poorly over this period of time. They may have been started on different medication, especially if they're on medication over a long period of time for things like baclofen, which affects their tone and their muscles. They might be on anti-epileptic medication that might have changed over this period of time. And they may well have had operations or interventions happen over that period of time. As I said before, you know, probably a lot of us have been putting on a bit of weight. But remember, our riders, a lot of our riders are children, and children grow very quickly. In the course of 18 months, they may have grown significantly. So thinking about their regular horse and in terms of their height and weight, that might have to change. Their leg length and arm length may also, if they've grown, this may also affect their physical ability as well. So having longer legs and having more of themselves to deal with can often have a negative effect on a rider's mobility, particularly a rider who's already struggling with physical disabilities. As I said, just being in the equestrian environment might make them quite anxious or stressed, and the thought that, you know, of getting on this big horse again and being in a class situation. A lot of kids won't have been to school, so they won't have been around other children. And if they're in a group ride, they won't have had all the noise, they won't have had all that stimulus. So suddenly we think about our riders' sensory abilities and that huge increase in sensory stimulation of coming into a noisy, often echoey, equine environment with different sounds, smells, lights, all those sorts of things, can often make our riders with ASD and other disabilities really quite anxious. So to suddenly come back into this group situation with lots of people there is, you know, could set off some real anxiety issues. So again, that's why it might be a good idea to have them back just for a welcome in smaller groups initially to start with. As I've said, often people have grown over this period of time, especially youngsters, so their hat might not be fitting anymore. They might have grown their hair, changed their hairstyle. That can often have an effect on hat size. So this is an important issue to consider as well. If they had problems before, if they were really quite wobbly before, have they worn a hat like this in the last 18 months? And are they going to tolerate wearing a hat again? Or is it going to take a while before they tolerate wearing a riding hat again? I know some of my riders, it takes a while to get them used to wearing a riding hat. So is this going to phase them? So it might be good to, again, get them to practice wearing their hat and make sure that you do have a hat that actually fits them. You might consider initially starting them off on some sort of simulator, or with doing quiet corners, or just being around the horse, doing some groundwork, just to get them used to the environment again. So there's plenty of things that you can consider doing off the horse to gradually break them into coming back to ridden works more slowly. And also, it's important to consider, once you've weighed up all these things, if their regular horse is still going to be suitable or not. Okay, Lindsay? Because there's so much to consider, it's really good to have a cohesive plan, to really think about breaking down all these different aspects that might have changed. And at your welcome day or assessment day, or whatever you want to call it, you want to notice various things about them. If they could walk independently before, are they still able to walk independently? Do you have steps into the environment, and can they still walk up those? Particularly if they were using them before. For instance, if they were mounting from a martello block and able to walk up the steps of a martello block to mount, it would be something that you would need to check. Obviously, wouldn't need to check that with every rider, but particularly if your method of mounting involves them needing to be able to walk up some steps. Is that as easy as it was before, or has that changed? Can they stand independently without help if they could do that before? And are they stable in sitting? And that's really important, because obviously that goes to how they're going to manage to support themselves seated on the horse. Communication. And again, has that changed? Have they developed more? You might find that their speech is better, because I know some children have been having online speech therapy, Zoom speech therapy over the period of time. So has their mode of communication actually changed over the last 18 months? Are they speaking better? You might notice that some of them are actually have developed in terms of their speech. They might have been introduced to different things that they weren't introduced to previously, like Makaton or sign language. There might be different ways that they're communicating now. So it's really important that you're up to date with how that might have changed in the interim period of time, because you want to be able to have your riders understand the instructions that you'll be giving them. Some riders have challenging behavior, as we all know. And with some riders, when they first started coming to you, you might have noticed that this challenging behavior over the weeks had settled down, and because they got used to coming, because they settled into the environment, because they enjoyed being on the horse, and just the movement of being on the horse has calmed them and has had a positive effect on this challenging behavior. But obviously, because they haven't been able to ride over this period of time, you may well see that this challenging behavior has worsened or returned. If they've been cooped up a lot in the house, just with parents and family around them, they might be extra clingy towards parents and carers if they've not been out seeing different people, seeing other adults, seeing other carers, being with other people, and they might be nervous of leaving their carer or their parent. So you might have to consider a longer period of time to warm them up to the idea of getting on the horse and leaving that person that usually comes with them. Sudden movements that happen often with people with particularly ataxic, what we call ataxic conditions, can worsen over a period of time. And obviously, if that has worsened, then again, is the horse that they used to ride going to be suitable? You're going to have to think very carefully about the temperament of the horse and whether the sudden movements are going to have a detrimental effect on the horse if they've become significantly worse. As I mentioned previously, briefly, folk with epilepsy may well have had their medication altered. Is their epilepsy still well controlled, or has that changed? And if it has changed, is it manageable? Can you still accommodate them within your particular environment? But you do need to know if it has changed, if their situation has changed. And if their tablets have changed, they might be having a detrimental effect. There might be side effects from those tablets. It can make people much more drowsy and less alert than they used to be. So if their epilepsy medication has changed, you might find that somebody is more difficult to communicate with if they are a little bit more drowsy, a little bit, more sedated almost with that epilepsy medication. So you might have to consider some special equipment, or your rider might have special equipment that they didn't have before. If they've had an operation, for instance, they may have splints or braces or something like that they didn't have before. If their mobility has deteriorated, they might have a different walking aid than they used before. So being aware of that, they might have a different wheelchair than they used before. They might have different attachments on the wheelchair that they used to have before. And if you've been used to mounting your rider from the wheelchair, if you have a ramp or something like that, then obviously you need to familiarize yourself with any extra or different attachments or brakes or foot pedals or removable armrests and things like that, because that will affect how you mount your rider and get them out of the wheelchair and onto the horse. Or you might be thinking, is there some special equipment that I need to employ? Thank you, Lindsay. So the other sorts of things that you're going to consider is getting into detail about their physical abilities, because this is really going to determine the sort of horse you use, how you get the person onto the horse, whether it's possible with your mounting equipment to even still get the person onto the horse, what sort of reins you might want to use with the rider, what sort of stirrups you might want to use with the rider, and which horse is going to be suitable. So when you're first noticing your rider, are they able to walk in? If they were before, obviously, if they've always come in a wheelchair, then, and that hasn't changed, then this isn't appropriate for that person. And as you're watching them walk in, do they walk in the same way that they walked before? So they might be walking in independently, but you might notice that their walking is more shuffly or more lopsided. So what's their balance and their symmetry like as they walk in? If you ask them to sit down, do they turn to sit easily? Do they have to look carefully where they're going to sit? Or is it just a natural way that they can turn to sit? That'll tell you about their balance. And it's going to affect how they're able to turn around and mount on the horse as well. Can they sit on a chair without armrests? So can they sit unsupported? And ensure that their feet are supported and flat to enable them to be able to do that. So don't try and sit a little tiny toot on a great big spinny chair that's going to throw their balance off and their little legs are dangling off the end, because that's really not going, that's a little unfair to them. So make sure that they're sitting on a chair of an appropriate size and that their feet are able to touch the floor. Because obviously with most riders, you'll have their feet supported in stirrups anyway, and they'll be sitting in a saddle. Can they, when they sit in front of the chair, if they go to get up, are they able to move themselves to the front of the chair, or do they rely on the back of the chair to keep them steady? So can they cope without being supported by the back of the chair? Because obviously the saddle doesn't have a back to it. So you need to know, are they able to sit on the chair without support front or back? Or do they need to hold on with their hands? Do they need to grip at the side of the chair? And once they're sitting, are they able to move their arms and their head? Are they able to turn and talk to somebody next to them and turn their head freely when somebody speaks to them? Have they got that free head movement that they're going to be able to tolerate wearing the weight of a hat on top of that head? Or is that going to negatively affect their posture so significantly that you know they wouldn't be able to tolerate wearing a hat? And do they need to prop? Do they need to lean on something, to like the chair or a table in front of them, to be able to be supported? Can they move in that position? Can they move themselves in that unsupported position? Can they transfer their weight from one sitting bone to the other? And on the form it says, can they lean for their trunk 4 inches to the right or 4 inches to the left? And you might just want to have your hands there, but a good instruction to give there is, can you shift your weight from one sitting bone to the other, from one buttock to the other? And that's what we want to find out, because obviously when we're riding, we need to be able to do that. And that's a skill that we need to be able to have to be balanced on the horse. The horse and the movement of the horse will move the rider's pelvis. And we want to know that they can be, their balance will be able to cope with that amount of movement. And this will tell us how much support they're potentially going to need, and whether they're going to need more support than they used to need. Forwards and backwards. So again, the pelvis is going to be moved not only from side to side by the movement of the horse, but also forwards and backwards. So especially, they're going to feel this movement more when the horse is going to stop. Are they going to keep falling forwards? Or when the horse goes off from a halt into a walk, are they going to shoot backwards and wobble backwards? Or have they got the core control there to be able to cope with a transition? And it might be that they have, but they are a little bit more wobbly. And that's what that's going to tell you is, I can't do sharp transitions with this person to begin with. They might have managed that before, but you might have to be a little more careful in the speed of your transitions and just gradually count them down to a halt or count them up to a walk on. So that, that's important too. And the leaning forwards and backwards is going to help you to know that. Are they going to be able to control the stirrups? So can they lift their right leg, their feet up off the floor? And this is not only going to tell you whether they can move their legs or not, but it's also going to tell you about their balance as well. So if they can lift one foot and then the other foot off the floor, the right leg and then the left leg, and keep and maintain a good sitting posture, this is going to tell you that they've got reasonable sitting balance and they should be able to cope with that movement of being on the horse. And it's also important to know whether they can move their legs in readiness for mounting, whether they can lift that leg over the horse whether they're going to be able to put that leg in the stirrup. And when we come on later, we'll think about standing and lifting the legs, which is going to be even more relevant for mounting. But it might be that if this person doesn't stand to mount, if they're doing a sort of turn onto the horse backwards and putting their bottom onto the horse, and then they normally help by lifting their leg over the front, then are they still able to do that and maintain their balance? Or are they going to need a lot more support in their body when they help by lifting their leg over than they did before? Can they lift their foot out in front of them and straighten their knee? And what happens when they do that? Does their sitting posture wobble, or are they able to hold that? That'll give you a good idea about how strong their legs are. It'll give you a good idea about their sitting balance as well. And the strength in the legs, particularly in the straight knees, is going to tell you whether their knees are strong enough to hold them up if you would normally dismount them into a standing position. So that's going to give you some good information about whether those knee muscles are going to be strong enough to enable them to bear weight when they're dismounting. Can they relax and sag in the chair and then sit up tall again? And that's going to really help to tell you whether they can free up the movement of their pelvis or not, whether they're able to rock their pelvis, and or whether their pelvis isn't able to move in relation to the top part of their body, and whether they're going to be very stiff and fixed on the horse. And that might also make you think about the welfare of the horse and the ability of the horse to carry that person. And again, it shows you whether they've got that ability to dissociate one part of their body from the other. And if they have, then again, their balance is going to be reasonably good. An obvious one, can they put their arms in the position of holding the reins? And can they move their hands forwards and back a little bit? And obviously this is going to help you to know if you can use the reins that you would normally have used with them, rainbow reins or just normal reins, or whether you might need to consider, if their hands have become weaker or their arms have become weaker, if you need to use something like the bunny ears or something like loop reins or different sort of reins, or not reins at all, and you need to work up to being able to hold the reins. Sitting to standing, this is going to be really important for you to know about, because obviously it's going to help you to know whether they can stand up to get on the horse. And it also tells us about their ability to transfer their weight onto their feet and lift their pelvis up. And that's what we need to do to be able to do a rising trot as well. And it goes to balance, it goes to all of the things we've already spoken about. So if they were used to being able to do a rising trot, just watch how they sit to stand. And again, it's important to notice symmetry here as well, because if they can get up, but they're very asymmetrical, then you might wait a while before you think about starting trotting again with them, and just make sure that they've got good symmetry before you think about that person starting to trot again. And this might be disappointing for some of the kids. They might be, oh, but I was trotting before, why can't I trot now, because we all know how much our kids love to trot. So it's just important to know that you want to look after the horse's back as well. And, you might say, well, we're going to do some exercises to strengthen your legs up in the saddle first. We're going to do some activities to get you really well balanced so that when we do trot, you'll get back into it really quickly again and we'll be super safe. So going on to the standing and lifting one leg and another leg, this goes back to being able to get up steps, being able to climb up a martello block, being able to lift a leg to put it in the stirrup. If you have somebody coming up a martello block or a mounting block, and they usually would hold on to the reins and the front of the saddle and then put their foot in the stirrup to get on? Are they going to be able to do that? Obviously, lifting the left leg isn't really important for that one. Can they lift the right one as well and weight bear on the left leg? And this is again going to give you some idea about the person's symmetry and whether that has deteriorated or not over that period of time. And very crucially, have their legs tightened up so much that actually, yes, you might be able to get them on if by doing a sitting on backwards, bottom onto the saddle and leg over the front, but it might be really obvious once you got the leg over the front that actually their legs weren't going to go round the saddle. So you need to check this before you get them actually on the horse. So if you have a rider that you know has had tight legs, tight muscles on the insides of their thighs in the past, then it's really important to know whether they can get their legs open enough. And it's quite a good idea. One way of doing that is to ask them to sit over the corner of a chair and pretend that they're on a horse. So you could ask them to sit astride a corner of a chair and see how, imagine, let's think how wide Jemima is that you normally ride. Let's see if imagine you're sitting on Jemima, how far apart would your knees have to be to do that, and get them to mimic sitting on whichever horse it is that they normally sit on, so that you can tell whether they would be able to do that again. Thank you, Lindsay. So once you've gone through this, are RDA activities recommended? Or does it have to be riding? If you're really worried about somebody's ability to get back on the horse, maybe start with some other things first and gradually see whether you think they're going to be able to come back into riding again. There's lots of things, other things that you can do, like groundwork and horse and knowledge and care, or carriage driving as well. So it might be that actually this person has deteriorated significantly enough that at the moment, RDA activities or actually putting them on a horse to ride is probably not a good idea. If you have access to a mechanical horse, might a few sessions using the mechanical horse first be more useful and help them get back into riding again? Are they going to be seeing their physiotherapist that they normally see? Because if they have deteriorated significantly over that period of time, are they going to be seeing a physiotherapist in order to get themselves back up to their normal level of physical fitness? So if there is a plan in place for them to have some rehabilitation, to have some physiotherapy, you might say to them, well, let's reassess you again in 6 months' time or a year's time to see if this has improved, or if your abilities have improved, or if you've lost weight, or whatever the reason is that you might be considering not starting them riding again. Somebody just mentioned, I happened to notice there that when I mentioned carriage driving, that carriage driving isn't allowed to start yet. So obviously that's something we need to take into consideration, but it might be something that you consider further down the line. Or yes, we are considering riding, but we need to think about different tack. Who better to advise you about different tack or what might be a good idea to use than your physiotherapist? So this may well be when you actually, if there's a significant reason why you're thinking, I'm not sure if their usual horse is suitable, I'm not sure if the tack that we usually use is suitable, and I'm not sure whether we can get this person on and off in the same way as we did before, then I think you're thinking about asking your regional physio, CPTRH rep, or whoever that, whichever physio you use normally to advise you, to come in and give you some advice about that particular rider. Okay, Lindsay. So lots of places that you can go for help. Obviously, as I just said, you can contact your county or regional physiotherapist, or we have CPTRH reps in most of the areas, even if they're not involved directly with RDA and not a regional county physiotherapist. Your nearest CPTRH rep might be able to help you with that. And RDA national office should be able to link you up with them, or the chairperson of CPTRH should be able to link you up with them. I'm not sure whether a list of the CPTRH reps has gone to national office or not, but obviously that's something Lindsay might be able to find out. There's obviously lots of information and advice on the RDA website, and your regional coach, if you're not sure where to look on the website or you're not sure where to go, obviously your regional coach would be able to help as well with that. Okay, Lindsay.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Valerie. Just to add to that, all of your wonderful information, we just wanted to make people aware that we do hope to come out to regions as soon as we can, especially to the groups that are starting up, just to support the groups and the participants, and make sure obviously that everybody's committed to safe practice and giving their participants the best experience. So we want to invest our time helping groups to have the confidence to get started again, basically knowing that they have our support. So you should see dates go onto our events page on marda.org.uk, and we'll email groups within each region as we start to set up the training. So I'll just stop sharing that screen now, and we should come back. Let's put this one up. So I think we've just got one more question. Is there one more? No, there we are. You've answered that carriage driving question. So I've got a couple of questions for you, Valerie. How often would you say groups would come to you throughout the year?
Throughout the year, it varies very much. Some groups are very active in using me, and I think it depends on the types of riders that groups take. Obviously, groups who do take more physically disabled riders do use me more often, and the groups, because I've been going out and doing a few talks to the groups in our region, they know what my role is, they know how I can support them better now, and so they are using me more than they did initially, because I've told them how I'm prepared to help and what I can offer them. But I do tend to, as I was saying to you earlier, I do tend to get a bit of a rush initially after the summer holidays, the school summer holidays, when everybody starts back again, when people have new riders starting and things like that. I tend to be quite busy in the sort of September time. I tend to get a lot of people, or after the Easter holidays as well, I tend to get quite a few groups on the phone asking me to come out. So usually the beginning of term I'm quite busy, and then it kind of falls away a little bit.
I can imagine. And during COVID, we've been asked for exercises that we can recommend to certain participants, but would you recommend this as a blanket thing?
It is something I myself had thought about doing, and I discussed it, with various people at RDA. And the problem with this is, if you consider the whole clientele of RDA riders, right from children of age 5 or 6 right up to adults and older adults, and you consider the massive breadth of abilities and needs of those riders, it's incredibly difficult to produce a one-size-fits-all video of exercises, because even if I considered doing some floor exercises, some chair-based exercises and some standing exercises, I wouldn't know who was doing what, and whether, if I told people to go down on the floor, whether they'd actually be able to get up again, and what different riders would benefit from. So it's incredibly difficult to produce that on a national scale. But I think if individual riders wanted advice about exercises coming back to prepare them to coming back to RDA. I think that's something that a regional physio could advise with, or a coach could advise with, you know, to give an idea of exercises. I know with my group, I've done some little videos for my riders, but I know my small number of riders very well, and I've been able to tailor those exercises specifically to their needs. So I would very much advise to try and tailor that exercise program to a group of your riders, to a specific group of, you know, particular riders that you think might need that sort of thing. You might have 3 or 4 riders in mind, and your physio might be able to help advise you about what those 3 or 4 riders would be able to do.
That's great. Thank you, Valerie. And thank you for giving up your time this evening for talking to us. I've been really interested, and I hope the groups can really use it and tap into their regional physios for help that they need to get the participants back on board.
Can I just
yes.
last thing, Lindsay, that came up when I was chatting to Lynn, is that obviously it's been over a year now since riders have attended, and riders are supposed to have new application forms after 3 years. So I'd strongly advise coaches to go through their riders and look at those who were on the 2-year level before COVID started, because they will be, obviously with the year added onto that, they're going to be needing a new application form. So just to go through those riders and double check.
Would you recommend for most riders, even if it isn't coming up to 3 years after having such a long period off?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yes. You know, you'll be able to tell, particularly those riders with physical disabilities. Obviously, the riders who are more physically able, but maybe have learning disabilities, it might not be such a great change, although the anxiety factor might be greater for those riders. But particularly those with physical disabilities, it's a good idea to have this assessment session or welcome session to just be able to observe them and see how, you know, about whether a detailed assessment would be a good idea. And I would strongly encourage a detailed assessment of riders with physical disabilities after this long period of time.
That's really good advice. If there are any other questions, do email me at the office, and I can get in touch with Valerie on your behalf. But thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. Thank you to Valerie, and tune into next week's webinar. Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody.